My sister deliberately sabotaged my job interview at Thornfield Industries, mocking me in front of the entire hiring committee. She thought she was destroying my career to protect her own position. What she didn't know was that my fiancé had just been appointed as the new regional director, and within 6 months, I'd be sitting in the executive suite as the youngest department head in company history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm going to take you back to that humiliating Tuesday morning in downtown Millhaven, when I walked into the gleaming lobby of Thornfield Industries for what I thought would be the most important interview of my life. The receptionist, a kind woman named Beverly, smiled warmly as she handed me my visitor's badge. "Good luck, honey," she whispered. "They've been looking for someone special for this marketing coordinator position." At 28, I'd been struggling to break into corporate marketing for 3 years. My degree from Riverside University was solid, my portfolio was strong, but somehow I always seemed to fall short in the final rounds. This position at Thornfield felt different, though. It felt like destiny. The company was expanding their digital marketing division, and everything about the job description seemed written specifically for my skill set. What I didn't know was that my older sister Vivienne had been working in Thornfield's HR department for 5 years, slowly climbing her way up to senior recruitment specialist. She'd built a reputation as someone who could, quote, identify problem candidates before they became company liabilities. In reality, she'd perfected the art of subtle sabotage. You see, Vivienne and I had always been competitors, but it wasn't a healthy sibling rivalry. From childhood, she'd made it clear that there wasn't room for both of us to succeed. When I got accepted to Riverside University, she told our parents I'd probably drop out within a year. When I graduated with honors, she questioned whether my degree would actually lead to anything meaningful. When I got engaged to Daniel, she made snide comments about whether he was settling for me. But I never imagined she'd actively destroy my career prospects. I spent the entire weekend before that interview preparing obsessively. I researched every department at Thornfield, memorized the names of key executives, and practiced my presentation until I could deliver it flawlessly in my sleep. My fiancé Daniel had been incredibly supportive, helping me rehearse answers and even buying me a new navy blazer that made me feel confident and professional. "You're going to be amazing, Cassandra," he'd said that morning, straightening my collar with such tenderness. "This company would be lucky to have you." Daniel worked in corporate consulting and was always traveling for work, so I treasured these quiet moments of encouragement before big career moments. The interview was scheduled for 10 a.m. with a panel of 4 people: the marketing director, the HR representative, the department supervisor, and someone from senior management. I arrived 15 minutes early and used the time to review my notes one final time in the lobby. Other candidates sat nervously nearby, all of us competing for the same opportunity. When Beverly called my name, I walked confidently toward the conference room, my portfolio tucked neatly under my arm. But as I approached the glass doors, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There, sitting at the interview table in a crisp white blouse and her signature red lipstick, was Vivienne. She looked up as I entered, and for just a split second, I saw something flash across her face. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. But it was quickly replaced by the professional smile she'd perfected in her HR role. "Good morning," said the marketing director, a stern-looking man named Robert Henley. "Please have a seat. We're excited to learn more about your qualifications." I tried to make eye contact with Vivienne, hoping for some sign of sisterly support, but she was deliberately focused on her notepad, already scribbling something. The other panel members introduced themselves: Sarah Kim from senior management, and James Morton, who would be my direct supervisor if hired. The interview started normally enough. I presented my portfolio, walked through my education and experience, and answered their preliminary questions with the confidence I'd practiced. But then Vivienne started asking questions, and I realized with growing horror that she wasn't trying to help me succeed. "Cassandra," she said, her voice taking on a tone I recognized from childhood, sweet on the surface, but with an underlying edge. "I notice there are some gaps in your employment history. Can you explain why you were unemployed for 6 months last year?" It was a fair question, but the way she asked it made it sound like I'd been lazy or unreliable. In reality, I'd been caring for our grandmother during her final illness, something Vivienne knew perfectly well since she'd barely visited during those difficult months. "I was providing end-of-life care for a family member," I replied carefully, not wanting to make it sound like a sob story. "I see," Vivienne nodded, making another note. "And how do we know that kind of personal obligation won't interfere with your commitment to this position?" The other panel members shifted uncomfortably. This line of questioning felt inappropriate, even to them. But Vivienne was just getting started. She proceeded to pick apart every aspect of my presentation, questioning my software skills, my project management experience, even my understanding of basic marketing principles. Each question was phrased to make me sound inexperienced or unreliable. When I mentioned a successful campaign I'd managed during an internship, she asked pointed questions about budget management that I couldn't answer because interns weren't given access to financial information. By the end of the 45-minute interview, I felt completely deflated. What had started as my dream opportunity had turned into a systematic demolition of my professional credibility, orchestrated by the one person who should have been supporting me. As I gathered my materials to leave, Vivienne finally looked directly at me. "Thank you for your time, Cassandra," she said with false sweetness. "We'll be in touch." The walk to the elevator felt like the longest 30 seconds of my life. Behind me, I could hear the panel members discussing the next candidate, their voices already moving on from my humiliation. What I didn't know was that my fiancé Daniel had been in a meeting just 3 floors above, finalizing his appointment as Thornfield's new regional director for strategic development. And what Vivienne didn't know was that her carefully orchestrated sabotage had just set in motion a chain of events that would completely reshape both of our careers. Sometimes the people who try to bury you don't realize they're actually planting seeds. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me take you back to how much this job opportunity meant to me, and why Vivienne's betrayal cut so deep. 3 months before that devastating interview, I'd been working the night shift at Brewster's Coffee House in downtown Millhaven, serving lattes to exhausted office workers and college students cramming for exams. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills while I sent out dozens of job applications every week. My apartment was a tiny studio above Mrs. Chen's flower shop, and my office was a folding card table wedged between my bed and the kitchenette. Every morning after my shift ended at 6 a.m., I'd come home, shower off the smell of espresso and pastry, and spend 3 hours applying for marketing positions. I had a system: job boards from 6:30 to 7:30, company websites from 7:30 to 8:30, and networking outreach from 8:30 to 9:30. Then I'd sleep until 2 p.m. and start the cycle over again. Daniel would find me hunched over my laptop at that little card table whenever he came back from his business trips, surrounded by coffee cups and crumpled draft cover letters. "Cass, you're going to burn yourself out," he'd say gently, rubbing my shoulders. But he understood why I couldn't stop. We both knew I was capable of so much more than serving coffee to people living the professional life I desperately wanted. The Thornfield Industries position appeared on LinkedIn on a Tuesday morning in late February. I almost scrolled past it. Senior marketing coordinator positions usually required 5 years of experience, and I only had 3 years of scattered internships and freelance work. But something about the job description made me pause. Seeking a creative, driven marketing professional to spearhead our digital transformation initiative. We value fresh perspectives and innovative thinking over traditional experience. Ideal candidate will have demonstrated success in social media strategy, content creation, and cross-platform campaign management. It was like they'd written the job description after reading my resume. My internship at Riverside Marketing Group had been entirely focused on digital strategy. My freelance work included 3 successful social media campaigns for local businesses. Even my college thesis had been on cross-platform marketing integration. But more than that, this was Thornfield Industries. The company had been featured in Marketing Today magazine 6 months earlier as one of the top 10 companies revolutionizing corporate marketing. Their headquarters was that gorgeous glass tower I passed every day on the bus to my coffee shop job, the one where I'd sometimes daydream about working while serving customers their morning fuel. I spent 2 weeks crafting my application, not just the resume and cover letter, but a complete portfolio presentation showcasing every project I'd ever worked on. I redesigned their sample campaign materials as spec work, created a comprehensive social media audit of their current presence, and even developed a mock presentation for how they could improve their millennial customer engagement. Daniel was traveling to Seattle that week for a consulting project, but he called me every night to check on my progress. "This is it, Cass," he said during one of our late-night phone calls. "This is the opportunity you've been working toward. I can feel it." The night before I submitted my application, I couldn't sleep. I kept getting up to review everything one more time, making tiny adjustments to the formatting, obsessing over word choices. At 3 a.m., Daniel called from his hotel room. "You can't keep second-guessing yourself," he said softly. "Your work is brilliant. You've put together something that would impress any hiring committee. You need to trust yourself." "What if it's not enough?" I whispered. "What if I'm still not ready for this level of position?" "Then they're idiots who don't recognize talent when they see it," he replied firmly. "But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're about to change your life." When I finally hit submit on the application portal at 4:17 a.m., I felt like I was launching a rocket ship to my future. The response came faster than I expected. 3 days later, Beverly from Thornfield's main reception called to schedule a preliminary phone screening. I was at work, steaming milk for a complicated order, when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to step away from the espresso machine. "Cassandra Rodriguez?" Beverly's warm voice came through clearly despite the coffee shop noise. "This is Beverly Morrison from Thornfield Industries. We received your application for the senior marketing coordinator position, and we're very impressed. Would you be available for a phone interview this Friday at 2 p.m.? I had to excuse myself to the storage room so the customer wouldn't hear me crying with joy. The phone interview went perfectly. I spoke with James Morton, the department supervisor, and he seemed genuinely excited about my ideas for modernizing their digital presence. "Your spec work was impressive," he said, "especially the social media audit. You identified gaps that we've been struggling to address internally." By the end of the 30-minute call, he was already talking about next steps. "We'd love to bring you in for an in-person interview with the full panel. How does next Tuesday morning work for you?" I requested the morning off from Brewster's, spent my entire last paycheck on that navy blazer Daniel had insisted I needed, and used every spare moment to prepare. I researched each panel member, studied Thornfield's recent marketing campaigns, and practiced my presentation until I could deliver it confidently while juggling coffee cups. The weekend before the interview, Daniel and I drove out to Clearwater Lake for what we thought would be a relaxing day to calm my nerves. As we sat on the dock watching the sunset, he took my hand. "Whatever happens on Tuesday," he said, "I want you to know how proud I am of how hard you've worked for this. You've never given up, even when things got difficult. That's the kind of person any company would be lucky to have." I leaned against his shoulder, feeling more hopeful about my future than I had in years. "This feels different," I admitted. "Like everything I've been working toward is finally coming together." "It is," he said, kissing the top of my head. "I can feel it too." That night, I laid out my interview outfit and went to bed early, setting 3 different alarms to make sure I wouldn't oversleep. I dreamed about walking through the doors of Thornfield Industries not as a visitor but as an employee. In my dream, I had my own office with a view of the city, business cards with my name and title, and the respect of colleagues who valued my contributions. I had no idea that my own sister was about to turn that dream into a nightmare. But I also had no idea that Daniel was carrying a secret that would change everything, not just for my career, but for our entire future together. Sometimes the universe has a plan that's bigger than what we can see from where we're standing. And sometimes the people who try to destroy our dreams end up creating something even better than what we originally imagined. The rejection email arrived exactly 48 hours after my interview, timed perfectly to crush any lingering hope I might have been clinging to. Dear Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for your interest in the Senior Marketing Coordinator position at Thornfield Industries. After careful consideration, we have decided to move forward with other candidates whose experience more closely aligns with our current needs. We appreciate the time you invested in the interview process and wish you success in your future endeavors. Sincerely, the Thornfield Industries hiring team. I read it 3 times sitting in the break room at Brewster's Coffee House, my hands shaking as I held my phone. Around me, the familiar sounds of the morning rush continued. Espresso machines hissing, cash registers chiming, customers chatting about their days ahead. But I felt completely disconnected from it all, like I was watching my life through thick glass. "You okay, honey?" asked Maria, my coworker who'd been covering the front counter while I checked my messages. She was a sweet woman in her 50s who treated all of us younger employees like her own children. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I didn't get the job," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "The marketing position at Thornfield. They said no." Maria's face fell. She'd been following my job search journey for months, always asking about applications and interviews, celebrating the small victories with me. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I really thought this was going to be the one." So did I. That was the worst part. For the first time in 3 years of job searching, I genuinely believed I had a real chance. The phone interview had gone so well. James Morton had seemed excited about my ideas, had even mentioned specific projects where my skills would be valuable. When I'd left the in-person interview, despite Vivienne's hostile questioning, I'd still felt like I'd managed to showcase my abilities. But apparently I'd been wrong about everything. I spent the rest of my shift moving through the motions mechanically, taking orders and making drinks while my mind replayed every moment of the interview. Had I been too confident in my presentation? Had I misread James Morton's enthusiasm during the phone screening? Had I somehow failed to answer one of Vivienne's pointed questions adequately? The worst part was that I couldn't even talk to Daniel about it yet. He was still in Seattle, dealing with a crisis at his consulting project, and I didn't want to dump my disappointment on him when he was already stressed. We'd planned to celebrate together when he got back Friday night, and now I'd have to tell him there was nothing to celebrate. When I finally got home to my studio apartment, after the longest shift of my life, I found myself staring at all the interview preparation materials still scattered across my card table. The portfolio I'd spent weeks perfecting, the company research notes, the practice questions I'd rehearsed until I could answer them in my sleep. All of it felt like evidence of my own foolishness now. I was shoving everything into a box when my phone rang. For a crazy moment, I thought maybe it was Thornfield calling to say there'd been a mistake, that they'd reconsidered. But the caller ID showed Vivienne's name. "Hi, Cass," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news wrapped in false sympathy. "I heard about the Thornfield decision. I'm really sorry it didn't work out." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "You heard about it?" "Well, I was on the hiring committee," she said, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "I thought you knew that when you applied." "Didn't you see my name on the interview panel?" I sank onto my bed, the box of interview materials sliding off my lap. "You were the HR representative in the interview." "Right, senior recruitment specialist. I've been with Thornfield for 5 years now." There was something almost pleased in her voice. "It's such a small world, isn't it?" "Why didn't you tell me you worked there?" I asked, my voice getting smaller. "When I told you about applying, you never mentioned you'd be involved in the hiring process." "Oh, you know how it is," Vivienne said airily. "I can't really discuss specific positions with family members. Conflict of interest and all that. I have to maintain professional boundaries." Professional boundaries. But she'd had no problem grilling me like a hostile witness. during the actual interview. "The thing is, Cass," she continued, "I think this was actually a blessing in disguise. That position would have been way too much responsibility for someone at your experience level. The learning curve would have been brutal, and honestly, I'm not sure you would have succeeded. This way, you can keep building your skills and maybe try again for something more appropriate in a few years." Each word felt like a small slap. My own sister, talking to me like I was an incompetent child who'd reached too far above my station. "The candidate they hired has 7 years of experience at Fortune 500 companies," she went on, "plus an MBA from Northwestern. That's really what they were looking for, someone who could hit the ground running without needing a lot of training and supervision." I wanted to hang up, but some masochistic part of me needed to hear exactly how inadequate she thought I was. "I actually advocated for you during the decision meeting," Vivienne said, and I could practically hear her patting herself on the back. "I told them that even though you didn't have the qualifications we typically require, you're family, so I knew you'd work hard to catch up." But Robert Henley, he's the marketing director, felt that this particular role needed someone more seasoned. The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that for a moment I almost believed her. Almost convinced myself that she'd actually tried to help me, that her brutal questioning during the interview had been some kind of test she'd hoped I'd pass. "Maybe you should consider going back to school," she suggested. "Get an MBA, build up some real corporate experience. I could probably put in a good word for you for an internship program in a few years, once you've developed more professional polish." Professional polish. Coming from the sister who used to practice job interviews in our childhood bedroom mirror, who'd clawed her way up from an entry-level HR assistant position through what I was beginning to suspect was pure political maneuvering rather than actual competence. "I have to go," I said, my throat tight with unshed tears. "Thanks for calling." "Of course, that's what sisters are for, right? Supporting each other through disappointments." Her voice was so sickeningly sweet it made my teeth ache. "I'm sure something perfect will come along soon. Something more suitable." After I hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment feeling smaller than I had in years. Not just disappointed about the job, but confused and hurt by the entire interaction with Vivienne. Something about her call felt wrong, calculated, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. I kept replaying moments from the interview, trying to understand where I'd gone so wrong. The way she'd asked about my employment gaps, making it sound like caring for our dying grandmother, was a character flaw. The way she'd questioned my software skills, despite having my portfolio right in front of her showing successful campaigns I'd created using those exact programs. The way she'd made me explain basic marketing concepts like I was a first-year student, rather than someone with a degree and 3 years of experience. At the time, I'd assumed she was just being thorough, maintaining professional distance because we were related. But now, thinking back on her tone during that phone call, I was starting to wonder if there had been something else going on. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the growing suspicion that my own sister might have actually worked against me. But that was crazy, wasn't it? Family doesn't sabotage family even when there's sibling rivalry involved. Or do they? I didn't sleep much that night, and when I finally drifted off around 4 a.m., I had dreams about being trapped in glass conference rooms while people in business suits discussed my inadequacies like I wasn't even there. In the dreams, Vivienne was always smiling that perfect professional smile, while writing notes that somehow determined my entire future. What I didn't know was that 3 floors above that conference room where my dreams had been crushed, Daniel had been in meetings all week finalizing his appointment as Regional Director for Strategic Development. And what I really didn't know was that those meetings included discussions about restructuring the entire marketing department, including the position I'd just been rejected for. Sometimes the people who try to bury us don't realize they're actually digging their own graves. 3 weeks after the Thornfield rejection, I found myself sitting alone in the corner booth of Romano's Diner at 2 a.m., still wearing my Brewster's Coffee House uniform and fighting back tears over a plate of cold scrambled eggs I couldn't afford. This had become my routine. Finishing the overnight shift, walking aimlessly through downtown Millhaven until the morning rush started, then hiding in this 24-hour diner where nobody knew me well enough to ask questions about why I looked like my world had collapsed. Daniel had been back from Seattle for 2 weeks, but somehow we kept missing each other. His consulting firm had him flying out again almost immediately. Denver this time, then Phoenix, then somewhere in Texas. We'd had exactly one real conversation since my interview disaster. A hurried phone call where I'd tried to explain what happened while he was rushing through an airport terminal. "I'm so sorry, Cass," he'd said, and I could hear the sympathy in his voice even through the poor connection. "I know how much that position meant to you, but something better will come along, I promise. You're too talented for this to be the end." Easy words when you're not the one watching your dreams crumble into nothing. The worst part wasn't even the rejection itself. It was the growing isolation that followed. I'd been so confident about the Thornfield opportunity that I'd started pulling back from other job applications, turning down freelance projects, even telling Mrs. Chen that I might not need my studio apartment much longer because I'd probably be moving to something better soon. Now I was trapped in a cycle of humiliation and financial panic. My savings account was down to $347. I'd had to ask my manager at Brewster's for extra shifts, which meant more hours serving coffee to business professionals who looked exactly like the person I dreamed of becoming. Every order felt like a reminder of my failure. "Large cappuccino, extra shot," ordered a woman in a sharp gray suit one morning. She was probably my age, maybe younger, scrolling through emails on her phone while I prepared her drink. Her confidence was magnetic. The way she stood, the way she spoke, even the way she ignored me completely, while conducting what sounded like important business calls. I wanted to hate her, but mostly I just envied her so intensely it physically hurt. "Cassandra Rodriguez?" she said suddenly, looking up from her phone as I handed her the cappuccino. My heart jumped. Maybe she was from another company, maybe she'd heard about my work somehow. Maybe this was the universe's way of delivering a second chance. "Yes, that's me," I said, trying to sound professional despite my coffee-stained apron and exhausted appearance. "I thought so. I'm Amanda Sterling from Hartwell Marketing." She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "I actually saw your application in our system a few months ago. Really impressive portfolio work." Hope surged through me like electricity. "Thank you so much. I'd love to discuss any opportunities you might have available." Amanda's expression shifted slightly, becoming more cautious. "Well, here's the thing. I was actually calling around to do some reference checks, and I spoke with someone at Thornfield Industries. Vivienne Martinez in HR?" My stomach dropped like a stone. "She mentioned that you'd interviewed there recently, and she had some concerns about your readiness for senior-level positions. Nothing major," Amanda added quickly, seeing my face. "Just that you might benefit from more entry-level experience before taking on bigger responsibilities." The cappuccino felt hot and heavy in my hands as I processed what Amanda was telling me. Vivienne hadn't just sabotaged my interview at Thornfield, she was actively spreading poison about me to other companies. "I see," I managed to say, my professional smile feeling like it might crack my face. "I'm sure it's nothing personal," Amanda continued, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "Corporate HR folks tend to be pretty conservative about recommendations, but I thought you should know, since it might affect how other companies view your applications." After she left, I had to excuse myself to the storage room so my coworkers wouldn't see me crying. 20 minutes of sobbing between boxes of coffee beans and paper cups, trying to understand how my own sister could be so systematically cruel. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since college. I called our mother. "Cassandra, honey," Mom's voice was warm and surprised. She lived in Portland now with her second husband, and we talked maybe 3 times a year. "What a nice surprise. How are things going with your job search?" I'd planned to tell her everything, about Thornfield, about Vivienne's sabotage, about feeling completely lost and alone. But when I opened my mouth, something held me back. "Actually, I had an interview at Vivienne's company recently," I said instead, testing the waters. "Oh, how wonderful! I'm sure she was so excited to help her little sister. Vivienne's done so well for herself at that company. She's always calling to tell us about her promotions and her important projects. Of course she was. Vivienne had always been the golden child, the one with the stable career and the impressive title, and the ability to make everything sound more successful than it actually was. Did she mention anything to you about how the interview went? I asked carefully. She said you did your best, but that corporate marketing is very competitive. She thinks you might be happier in a smaller company, somewhere less pressure. Mom's tone was gentle, but carried that familiar undertone of lowered expectations. You know how Vivienne worries about you. She just wants you to find something that's a good fit. Worries about me? Right. I hung up feeling more alone than before I'd called. Even my own mother had been recruited into Vivienne's narrative about my inadequacy, my need for less pressure, and lower expectations. The next morning brought another blow. I'd applied for a social media coordinator position at a local nonprofit, something well below my qualifications, but I was getting desperate. The rejection email was brief. After reviewing your application and conducting reference checks, we've decided to pursue other candidates. Reference checks. My hands were shaking as I immediately called the number listed for their HR department. Hi, this is Cassandra Rodriguez. I interviewed for your social media coordinator position, and I was wondering if you could provide any feedback about my application. The woman on the other end was quiet for a moment. I probably shouldn't say this, but we had a very concerning conversation with someone from Thornfield Industries. They suggested you might not be reliable for professional commitments. My vision went white around the edges. What exactly did they say? Look, I really can't get into specifics, but you might want to consider who you're listing as references. Sometimes people we think will support us don't. I wasn't listing Vivienne as a reference. She was seeking out these companies herself, positioning herself as a concerned industry insider, providing helpful warnings about an unsuitable candidate. That night, I sat in my studio apartment with my laptop open, staring at job boards I could no longer bring myself to browse. Every application felt pointless now. Even if I managed to get an interview, Vivienne's poison would follow me, turning opportunity into humiliation. For the first time since graduating college, I seriously considered giving up on marketing entirely. Maybe I could go back to school for something else. Maybe I could move somewhere far from Millhaven where Vivienne's influence couldn't reach. Maybe I could just accept that my dreams had been too big for someone like me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was being destroyed by someone who supposedly loved me, while the person who actually did love me was too far away and too busy to see how badly I was drowning. Daniel's calls had become shorter and less frequent as his consulting project intensified. Our texts were brief exchanges about logistics and timing, with no room for the kind of emotional support I desperately needed. I was 28 years old, living in a city where I'd grown up, surrounded by my own family, and I had never felt more completely alone in my life. What I didn't know was that just 12 miles away in Thornfield's executive offices, Daniel was finishing up negotiations that would completely change both of our lives. And what I really didn't know was that Vivienne's systematic campaign to destroy my career was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. Sometimes when you're at your lowest point, you're actually standing on the foundation of something magnificent that's about to be built. I was restocking the pastry case at Brewster's during the Thursday morning rush when everything changed. It was 7:43 a.m. exactly. I remember because I'd been watching the clock, counting down the hours until my shift ended, and I could go home to hide under my blankets for the rest of the day. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see a young woman about my age stride in with the kind of purposeful energy that made other customers instinctively step aside. She had short auburn hair, sharp green eyes behind designer glasses, and wore a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Everything about her screamed corporate executive, which immediately made me self-conscious about my stained apron and exhausted appearance. But instead of joining the order line, she walked directly to the counter where I was working and said, "Excuse me, are you Cassandra Rodriguez?" My heart stopped. After weeks of Vivienne's sabotage campaign, unexpected visitors asking for me by name had become a source of terror rather than hope. Maybe this was another HR representative coming to warn me about something. Maybe Vivienne had escalated her attacks somehow. "Yes," I said cautiously, "but I'm working right now. If this is about a job application, maybe we could—" "Actually," she interrupted, glancing around the busy coffee shop, "this is about Thornfield Industries. I'm Elena Vasquez, and I really need to talk to you. Privately, when do you get off work?" Elena Vasquez. The name didn't ring any bells, but her mention of Thornfield made my stomach clench with familiar dread. "I finish at 8 a.m., I said slowly. "But if this is about references or background checks, I think there might be some miscommunication." "There's miscommunication, all right," Elena said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "But not the kind you think. Is there somewhere we can talk? Somewhere away from here?" Something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. She didn't seem like someone coming to deliver bad news. She seemed like someone who was furious about something that had already happened. "There's a park across the street," I said, "Millhaven Square. I could meet you there at 8:15? "Perfect. And Cassandra?" Elena's expressions softened slightly. "Bring whatever portfolio materials you have. The real ones, not edited versions. This conversation is going to be very different from what you're expecting." The remaining 17 minutes of my shift felt like 17 hours. I kept glancing out the window to see if Elena was still there, afraid she might disappear and leave me wondering if I'd imagined the entire encounter. But she was sitting on a bench in the square, typing furiously on her phone with the kind of intensity that suggested she was handling something urgent and complicated. When I finally made it across the street with my worn portfolio bag, Elena stood up and gestured for me to sit beside her. Up close, I could see that despite her polished appearance, she looked like she hadn't slept much either. "Before I say anything else," she began, "I need you to know that what happened to you at Thornfield was not normal. It was not professional. And it was absolutely not justified by anything in your qualifications or your interview performance." I stared at her, not sure how to respond. "I don't understand. Who are you exactly?" "I'm the Assistant Director of Strategic Development at Thornfield," Elena said. "I've been with the company for 4 years, and I've never seen anything like what Vivienne Martinez did to you. I'm here because what she's doing isn't just wrong, it's potentially illegal." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "What do you mean? What she did to me?" Elena pulled out a tablet and opened what looked like an official company document. "I mean that I've been investigating irregularities in our hiring process, and your case is the worst example I've found. Vivienne has been systematically sabotaging candidates she perceives as threats to her position or her influence." She turned the tablet toward me, showing what appeared to be email records. "These are internal communications between Vivienne and other department heads. Look at the dates. These were sent before your interview even took place." I read the first email with growing horror. "Heads up about tomorrow's marketing coordinator candidate. Cassandra Rodriguez has some red flags I'll need to address during the interview. Potential reliability issues and overconfidence about her skill level. We'll handle accordingly. VM." "She was planning to sabotage me before she even met me," I whispered. "It gets worse," Elena said, scrolling to another message. "This was sent to James Morton 2 hours after your interview." The second email was even more damning. "As discussed, the Rodriguez candidate is not suitable for our corporate environment. Recommend we focus on the external candidates with more traditional backgrounds. Happy to provide detailed assessment if needed for documentation purposes." My hands were shaking as I held the tablet, but James seemed enthusiastic during my phone interview. He said my ideas were exactly what they were looking for. "Because they were," Elena said firmly. I've reviewed your application materials, and frankly, you were the strongest candidate we interviewed. Your digital strategy proposals were innovative. Your portfolio work was excellent, and your understanding of our market challenges was spot on. James was excited about you until Vivienne convinced him otherwise. I felt like I was living in an alternate reality. Why are you telling me this? And how do you even know about these emails? Elena's expression hardened. Because 3 weeks ago, we got a new regional director who started asking questions about our hiring practices. Daniel Reeves. He's been conducting a comprehensive review of HR procedures, and when he saw the disconnect between candidate qualifications and hiring decisions, he ordered a full investigation. Daniel Reeves. Daniel, my brain struggled to process this information. You know Daniel Reeves? Elena asked, noticing my expression. He's my fiancé, I said weakly, but I had no idea he was working at Thornfield. He told me he was doing consulting work in Seattle and Denver, and… Elena's eyes went wide. Oh my God, you're the Cassandra he's been talking about, the one whose career dreams were getting derailed by family sabotage. She shook her head in amazement. He had no idea it was happening at his own company. He knows about Vivienne? He knows someone in your family has been undermining your job search, but he doesn't know the specifics. He's been going crazy trying to figure out how to help you without overstepping boundaries. Elena leaned forward intently. Cassandra, Daniel didn't just take a position at Thornfield. He's been appointed as regional director, with oversight of all department restructuring, including marketing and HR. The park around us seemed to fade away as I tried to process what Elena was telling me. Daniel hadn't been traveling for consulting work. He'd been in negotiations for a major executive position at the company where my sister worked, the company where she'd destroyed my opportunity and was continuing to poison my reputation. There's more, Elena continued. The investigation Daniel ordered has uncovered evidence that Vivienne has been doing this to other candidates too. Women, mostly. People she views as competition or threats. She's been using her position in HR to manipulate hiring decisions and protect her own influence within the company. She showed me another screen full of emails and documents. We have records of her contacting other companies to provide keyed candidates who were rejected here. What she's been doing to you? Spreading negative information to sabotage your other job applications. That's harassment and potentially defamation. I stared at the evidence of my sister's systematic cruelty, feeling a mix of vindication and rage I'd never experienced before. All those weeks of self-doubt, of wondering what was wrong with me, of thinking I wasn't good enough, it had all been manufactured by someone who is supposed to love and support me. What happens now? I asked. Elena's smile was sharp and satisfied. Now we fix this. Daniel's been trying to figure out how to help you without creating ethical complications, but now that we know the sabotage was happening internally, everything changes. She closed the tablet and looked at me directly. Cassandra, how would you feel about coming back to Thornfield? Not as a favor to Daniel, but because you're genuinely the best candidate for the position. We're restructuring the entire marketing department, and we need someone with your skills to lead the digital transformation initiative. What about Vivienne? What about her? Elena's voice was ice cold. She's going to be too busy dealing with the consequences of her actions to worry about anyone else's career. HR departments that engage in discriminatory hiring practices tend to face serious repercussions. I looked across the park at the Thornfield building, its glass walls gleaming in the morning sun. 6 weeks ago, I'd walked into that building full of hope and dreams. I'd walked out broken and humiliated, convinced I wasn't good enough for the professional world I desperately wanted to join. Now I was being offered a chance to walk back in as exactly the person I'd always known I could be. When would this happen? I asked. Elena checked her phone. Daniel's planning to announce the department restructuring next Monday. If you're interested, you could be starting as digital marketing director, not coordinator, director, by the end of next week. Director. The words sent a thrill of possibility through me that I hadn't felt in weeks. There's just one thing, Elena added with a mischievous smile. Daniel doesn't know I'm here. He's been agonizing over how to help you without compromising professional ethics. I thought it might be fun to surprise him. As I sat in that park, holding evidence of my sister's betrayal in one hand and an unexpected path to my dreams in the other, I realized that sometimes the universe doesn't just give you second chances. Sometimes it gives you the exact revenge you never knew you needed. Elena stood up from the park bench and gestured toward the Thornfield building. There's something else you need to see, but we'll have to go to my office. The full scope of what Vivienne's been doing. It's bigger than just your interview. 20 minutes later, I found myself in the elevator of the building where my dreams had been crushed, wearing my coffee shop uniform and carrying my battered portfolio bag. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was returning as a guest of someone with actual power instead of a desperate job candidate. Elena's office was on the 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Millhaven. Her desk was covered with manila folders, printouts, and what looked like organizational charts with red marks and sticky notes everywhere. "Coffee?" she offered, gesturing to a machine that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "I think I've had enough coffee for one lifetime," I said, still trying to process everything that was happening. Elena laughed. "Fair point. Okay, sit down. What I'm about to show you is going to make you angry, but it's also going to make you understand that none of what happened to you was your fault." She opened the largest manila folder and spread out what looked like a comprehensive investigation report. When Daniel started his review of hiring practices, he wasn't specifically looking for discrimination. He was analyzing efficiency metrics, time to hire, candidate satisfaction scores, retention rates of new employees. I leaned forward to look at the charts and graphs scattered across her desk. But then he noticed something strange, Elena continued. Thornfield's rejection rate for qualified female candidates was 37% higher than our rejection rate for male candidates with identical qualifications. That's not just unusual, it's potentially illegal. She pointed to a color-coded spreadsheet. So he dug deeper, and that's when we discovered the Vivienne problem. The Vivienne problem? Elena pulled out a thick folder labeled Martinez v. Internal Review. Your sister has been involved in hiring decisions for over 300 candidates in the past 2 years. Want to guess what we found when we analyzed the outcomes? My stomach was already sinking, but I nodded for her to continue. 93% of the candidates Vivienne rated as unsuitable were women under 35. 86% of those women had qualifications that exceeded our minimum requirements for their positions. And here's the really telling part. 62% of those women were referred to her attention by other departments as strong candidates. Elena opened another folder. James Morton, your would-be supervisor, had specifically requested that you be fast-tracked through the interview process. He'd reviewed your portfolio and wanted to make you an offer before someone else snatched you up. What happened? Vivienne convinced him that he'd misread your qualifications. She told him that while your creative work was, quote, adequate, you lacked the strategic thinking and leadership potential needed for a senior role. She suggested that hiring you would be setting you up to fail and would ultimately reflect poorly on his judgment as a manager. I felt sick. She made him think promoting me would hurt his own career. Exactly, and that's her standard playbook. Elena pulled out printed emails with highlighted sections. Look at this pattern. Every time a department head expresses interest in a female candidate, Vivienne finds reasons why that candidate is risky or not quite ready or better suited for a smaller company. The emails were damning. Message after message showing Vivienne systematically undermining qualified women while championing less qualified male candidates. She'd perfected the art of sounding concerned and professional while destroying careers. But why? I asked. What does she gain from this? Elena's expression hardened. Power, control, job security. Think about it. If she's the gatekeeper who protects the company from hiring unsuitable candidates, she becomes indispensable. Plus, every woman she keeps out of the company is one less person who might eventually compete with her for promotions. She showed me another document. We also discovered that Vivienne has been building personal relationships with department heads by positioning herself as their ally in, quote, maintaining company culture. She makes them feel like she's protecting them from the burden of training inexperienced employees. Company culture, I repeated bitterly. Code for, quote, keeping women in junior positions, Elena confirmed. And here's the part that's going to make you furious. She's been taking credit for the success of candidates she didn't sabotage. Every time a hire works out well, she makes sure people know she quote 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 quote. Elena opened her laptop and pulled up what looked like performance reviews. Your sister has received 2 promotions in the past 18 months, largely based on her supposed expertise in, quote, candidate assessment and cultural fit evaluation. The scope of Vivienne's manipulation was staggering. She hadn't just sabotaged me. She'd built an entire career on systematically sabotaging other women, while taking credit for the successes of people she hadn't managed to destroy. How many women are we talking about? I asked. That we can document? 47 over the past 2 years. But Daniel suspects it goes back much further than that. Elena's voice was grim. And that's just at Thornfield. We've started reaching out to her previous employers, and similar patterns are emerging. She pulled out another folder, this one even thicker. Remember how she's been contacting other companies to give you informal references? We tracked down 12 companies that received calls from her about various candidates. She's been operating like some kind of shadow blacklist service. I stared at the evidence spread across Elena's desk. Charts, emails, performance reviews, documented patterns of discrimination that stretched back years. My sister hadn't just sabotaged my interview. She'd been running a sophisticated operation to control who succeeded and who failed in our entire professional community. The legal department is reviewing everything, Elena continued. What Vivienne's been doing violates company policy, federal employment law, and potentially constitutes criminal harassment. She's been systematically denying qualified people employment opportunities based on gender, and she's been using company resources to interfere with their job searches at other organizations. What about the candidates she helped reject? Can anything be done for them? Elena's smile was sharp with satisfaction. Daniel's already authorized a comprehensive review of every hiring decision Vivienne influenced in the past 3 years. We're going to reach out to qualified candidates who were rejected and offer them positions appropriate to their skills. It's going to be expensive, but it's the right thing to do. She gestured to another stack of files. Some of these women gave up on their career goals entirely because of Vivienne's sabotage. One went back to school thinking she wasn't qualified for corporate work. Another moved to a different city because she thought the job market here was just too competitive. We're going to fix as much of the damage as we can. The magnitude of what Elena was describing was overwhelming. Vivienne hadn't just hurt me. She'd derailed dozens of careers, destroyed countless dreams, and systematically prevented an entire generation of women from achieving their professional potential. There's one more thing, Elena said, pulling out a final document. We found evidence that Vivienne has been in contact with HR departments at our biggest competitors, sharing, quote, concerns about candidates who apply to multiple companies in our industry. My blood went cold. She's been sabotaging people across the entire marketing sector? It looks that way. She's positioned herself as some kind of informal industry watchdog, warning companies about, quote, problematic candidates. She's created an invisible network of discrimination that's been affecting the entire professional landscape in Millhaven. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of my sister's cruelty. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or professional jealousy. This was systematic oppression disguised as helpful expertise. How long has Daniel known about this? I asked. He's known about the statistical patterns for 2 weeks, but he only connected it specifically to Vivienne yesterday. And he has no idea she's your sister, Elena said. When he realizes that the person who's been destroying your career is the same person who's been systematically discriminating against women at his own company. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I could imagine Daniel's reaction when he discovered that the family sabotage he'd been trying to help me escape was happening right under his nose at Thornfield. Elena, I said slowly, when you said I could start as digital marketing director next week, what exactly did you mean? Her grin was predatory. I meant that Daniel's restructuring plan includes eliminating positions that have been used to gatekeep opportunities and creating new leadership roles for people with actual qualifications. Vivienne's going to find herself reporting to people she spent years trying to keep out of the company. Including me? Especially you. Your new position would give you oversight of hiring practices for the entire marketing department. You'd be working directly with HR to ensure fair and equitable recruitment processes. The beautiful, perfect irony of it hit me like lightning. Vivienne had spent years building a system to keep women like me out of power, and now she was about to find herself answering to exactly the kind of person she'd been trying to eliminate. When do we tell Daniel? I asked. Elena checked her watch. He's in meetings all morning, but he's free at 2 p.m. How would you like to walk into his office and surprise him with the solution to both of your problems? Elena walked me to the company cafeteria while we waited for Daniel's 2 p.m. meeting window. The irony of sitting in Thornfield's employee dining area, surrounded by people who worked in the building where my career had been systematically destroyed, wasn't lost on me. But Elena had insisted we needed to discuss something else before I met with Daniel, something she called the personal dimension of Vivienne's sabotage. The patterns we uncovered in the hiring data were damning enough, Elena said, stirring her coffee absently. But when Daniel asked me to do deeper background research on Vivienne's methods, I found something that goes beyond professional misconduct. This is going to be hard to hear, Cassandra. She pulled out her phone and opened what looked like a private messaging app. We discovered that Vivienne has been documenting her targets, keeping detailed files on the women she sabotages. Not just their professional qualifications, but personal information, family backgrounds, relationship status, financial situations, even social media activity. My stomach dropped. What kind of personal information? Information she uses to craft her sabotage more effectively. Elena's voice was tight with disgust. For example, she knew you were struggling financially, so she made sure to mention to other companies that you might be desperate and willing to accept positions you weren't qualified for. She scrolled through screenshots on her phone. She also knew about your relationship with Daniel, though she didn't know his connection to Thornfield at the time. She told at least 3 companies that you were, quote, distracted by personal relationships and might not be fully committed to your career. The violation felt even more intimate than the professional sabotage. How did she get that information? Some of it came from family conversations, but she's also been monitoring social media accounts, reaching out to mutual contacts, even calling your previous employers to verify information under the guise of reference checking. Elena's expression was grim. Cassandra, she's been building psychological profiles to determine the most effective way to destroy each person's confidence and career prospects. She showed me a document that made my blood run cold. It was a detailed file with my name at the top containing information I'd never shared with Vivienne directly. My financial struggles, my insecurities about my career, even notes about my relationship with our parents, and how she could potentially use family dynamics against me. Where did this come from? I whispered. We found it on her work computer during the investigation. She's been keeping these files on every woman she's targeted. Elena scrolled to show me entries about other candidates. Look at this one. She documented that a candidate named Rachel Park had recently gone through a divorce, So Vivienne made sure to emphasize during the hiring discussion that, quote, personal instability could affect job performance. The systematic cruelty was breathtaking. She's been weaponizing our vulnerabilities. Exactly. And the worst part is how she's been using family relationships to gather intelligence. Elena pulled up what looked like text message screenshots. These are conversations between Vivienne and your mother. I read the messages with growing horror. They appeared to be casual family check-ins, but Vivienne was clearly fishing for information about my job search, my emotional state, my financial situation, even my relationship with Daniel. Mom, how's Cassie doing with her job hunt? One message read. I worry about her getting discouraged. Has she mentioned how she's handling the rejections? And our mother had responded with detailed updates about my struggles, my self-doubt, my financial stress. All information that Vivienne had apparently used to make her sabotage more psychologically devastating. She's been manipulating our entire family to collect ammunition against me, I said, feeling sick. It gets worse, Elena said gently. We found evidence that she's been doing this to other family members of her targets too. Calling parents, siblings, even spouses under the pretense of professional networking to gather personal information she can use against candidates. She showed me call logs from Vivienne's work phone. Dozens of calls to family members of women who'd been rejected from Thornfield, all logged as reference checking or industry networking. One woman's mother told Vivienne that her daughter had been seeing a therapist for anxiety, Elena continued. Vivienne then contacted the woman's potential employers to express concerns about mental health stability. Another candidate's sister mentioned financial pressures from student loans, so Vivienne suggested to hiring managers that the candidate might job hop for better pay. I felt like I was discovering that someone I'd lived with my entire life was actually a stranger, a predator who'd been systematically studying and exploiting the people around her. The psychological evaluation our legal team commissioned called it, quote, strategic emotional manipulation with narcissistic undertones, Elena said. Vivienne doesn't just want to succeed, she needs to ensure that specific people fail, particularly women she sees as threats to her self-image. Threats to her self-image? Elena pulled out another document, what looked like a psychological profile report. According to the analysis, Vivienne has built her identity around being the, quote, successful sister in your family. Your achievements don't just represent competition to her, they represent an existential threat to how she sees herself. The report was filled with clinical language that somehow made Vivienne's cruelty even more chilling. The subject demonstrates patterns consistent with malignant narcissism, including the need to maintain superiority through the systematic undermining of perceived rivals, particularly family members, who might challenge their self-narrative. She's been destroying my career because she can't psychologically handle the idea that I might be successful too, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The report suggests that Vivienne's sabotage escalated after you graduated college with honors, Elena explained. That achievement represented a challenge to her role as the smart one in the family, so she's been systematically ensuring that your academic success never translates to professional success. Elena showed me a timeline that connected major events in my life with increases in Vivienne's sabotage activities. When you got engaged to Daniel, her interference with your job applications doubled. When you started getting interviews for senior positions, she expanded her operation to include contacting other companies. The pattern was clear and devastating. Every positive development in my life had triggered an escalation in Vivienne's campaign to destroy my career. There's something else, Elena said, her voice even more serious. We found evidence that Vivienne has been planning to sabotage your relationship with Daniel too. My heart stopped. What do you mean? Elena showed me another set of documents. She's been researching Daniel's consulting company, trying to find ways to contact his colleagues and clients. We found draft emails where she was planning to reach out to his professional network with, quote, concerns about his judgment in personal relationships. The emails were never sent, but their existence showed just how far Vivienne was willing to go. She wasn't content to just destroy my career. She was planning to undermine the one relationship that had been sustaining me through her attacks. "She's been treating your entire life like a strategic campaign to be dismantled," Elena said. "Your career, your family relationships, your romantic relationship, even your self-confidence. She's been systematically attacking every foundation of your happiness and success." I sat in that corporate cafeteria, surrounded by the normal sounds of office workers having lunch, trying to process the revelation that my own sister had been conducting a comprehensive psychological warfare campaign against me for years. "The most disturbing part," Elena continued, "is that she's been documenting her successes. She keeps records of when her targets give up on their goals, when they move away, when they accept positions below their qualifications. She treats it like a game with a scoring system." She showed me one final document, a spreadsheet titled Impact Assessment, where Vivienne had tracked the long-term effects of her sabotage on different women. Next to my name was a note, "Target showing signs of decreased confidence and lowered career aspirations. Continue pressure to achieve complete professional disengagement." Complete professional disengagement. She hadn't just wanted me to fail at Thornfield. She'd wanted me to give up on my career entirely. "Cassandra," Elena said softly, "what Vivienne has been doing to you isn't just sibling rivalry or professional jealousy. It's systematic abuse designed to destroy your sense of self-worth and your ability to achieve independence. She's been trying to keep you in a position where you'll always be dependent on family approval that she controls." As I absorbed the full scope of what my sister had been doing, I felt something shift inside me. The self-doubt that had been consuming me for weeks was replaced by a cold, clear anger. This wasn't about my inadequacy or my failure to measure up to professional standards. This was about someone who'd spent years methodically destroying my life because my success threatened her psychological need to feel superior. "When do I meet with Daniel?" I asked, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. Elena checked her watch. "In 20 minutes. Are you ready to walk into his office and tell him that the person who's been systematically discriminating against women at his company is the same person who's been sabotaging his fiancé's career?" I stood up, feeling more certain about my purpose than I had in months. "I'm ready to make sure Vivienne never has the power to do this to anyone else ever again." Walking toward Daniel's office on the 22nd floor felt like moving through a dream sequence. Elena had arranged for me to access the executive floors using her security clearance, and every step through those polished corridors reminded me that I was about to enter a world where I actually belonged, a world my sister had spent years convincing me I could never reach. "He's going to be shocked," Elena murmured as we approached the corner office with Daniel's name on a gleaming brass nameplate. "He's been carrying so much guilt about not being able to help you, and now he's going to discover he had the power to fix everything all along." Through the glass walls, I could see Daniel at his desk, reviewing what looked like organizational charts and budget projections. He was wearing the navy suit I'd helped him pick out 6 months ago, back when I thought his biggest career challenge was managing difficult consulting clients. Seeing him in this executive setting, clearly in command of his domain, made me realize how much I'd underestimated his professional trajectory. Elena knocked on the door frame. "Daniel, sorry to interrupt, but I have someone here who needs to speak with you about the HR investigation." Daniel looked up, and the moment he saw me, his expression shifted through confusion, concern, and something that looked like panic. He immediately stood up, his chair rolling backward. "Cassandra? What are you doing here?" "Elena is everything." He stopped mid-sentence as his eyes took in my coffee shop uniform and the serious expressions on both our faces. "What's going on?" "Daniel," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "we need to talk about Vivienne Martinez." The color drained from his face. Vivian Martinez from HR? What about her? Elena gestured for us both to sit down. Daniel, meet Cassandra Rodriguez, the woman whose career has been systematically sabotaged by family betrayal. And Cassandra, meet your fiancé, who's been investigating discriminatory hiring practices at the company where your sister works. Daniel sank into his chair, staring at me with an expression of dawning horror. Vivian Martinez, is your sister the one who's been undermining your job applications? The same one who rejected my application here 6 weeks ago and has been contacting other companies to destroy my reputation ever since, I confirmed. For a long moment, Daniel just sat there processing the information. Then he turned to Elena with the kind of focused intensity I'd seen him use during difficult business negotiations. Show me everything, he said. Elena opened her laptop and began pulling up the investigation files. The statistical analysis you requested revealed that Vivienne has been systematically discriminating against qualified female candidates for over 2 years. But when we dug deeper into her methods, we discovered something much more extensive. She projected the data onto Daniel's large monitor. Vivienne hasn't just been sabotaging individual candidates. She's been operating a sophisticated intelligence network designed to control career opportunities across the entire marketing sector in Millhaven. Daniel leaned forward, studying the charts and documents with the analytical precision that had made him successful in consulting. This network analysis, these are communications with other companies? 14 different organizations, Elena confirmed. Vivienne has positioned herself as an industry expert who provides, quote, informal guidance about candidate suitability. She's been influencing hiring decisions at our biggest competitors, our partner companies, and even small marketing firms across the city. She pulled up a map showing Vivienne's network of contacts. She's essentially created a shadow blacklist system. When she decides someone is a threat, she doesn't just reject them from Thornfield. She makes sure they can't get hired anywhere in the industry. Daniel's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscles working. How many people has she affected? That we can document? Over 100 women in the past 3 years. But the actual number is probably much higher. Elena switched to another screen showing a timeline. The pattern escalated significantly after she was promoted to senior recruitment specialist. More authority meant more power to influence decisions. Show me Cassandra's case specifically, Daniel said, his voice deadly quiet. Elena pulled up my file, and I watched Daniel's expression grow darker with each revelation. The pre-interview sabotage planning, the coordinated rejection campaign, the systematic contact with other companies to poison my reputation, the psychological profiling and family manipulation. She's been treating Cassandra like a strategic target for elimination, Elena explained. Not just professionally, but personally. She's been gathering intelligence from family members and using it to maximize psychological damage. Daniel turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and guilt. Cassandra, all those weeks when you were struggling with rejection after rejection, when you started doubting your abilities, when you thought you weren't good enough. It was all manufactured, I finished. Every single setback was orchestrated by someone who had access to inside information about my applications and my emotional vulnerabilities. Elena pulled up the most damning evidence, Vivienne's personal documentation system. She's been keeping detailed records of her sabotage campaigns, tracking the psychological impact on her targets, and planning escalated attacks based on their responses. Daniel read through Vivienne's notes about me, his face growing colder with each line. She documented your financial stress to use against you. She tracked your interview schedules to time her sabotage calls. She even... He stopped reading and looked up at me. She was planning to target our relationship? We found draft communications where she was researching your professional network, Elena confirmed. She was preparing to contact your clients and colleagues with concerns about your personal judgment and professional reliability. Daniel stood up abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked downtown Millhaven. She was going to destroy both our careers to satisfy some twisted need for control. The psychological assessment suggests she views Cassandra's potential success as a fundamental threat to her self-identity, Elena said. She's built her entire sense of self-worth around being the successful member of their family. Cassandra's achievements represent an existential challenge to that narrative. So she decided to make sure Cassandra could never achieve anything, Daniel said, his voice filled with cold anger. Elena nodded. And she's been doing the same thing to dozens of other women, using her position at Thornfield as a platform to control who succeeds and who fails across the entire industry. Daniel turned back to us, and I could see the executive decision-maker taking control. What legal exposure does the company have? Significant, Elena admitted. Federal discrimination violations, state harassment laws, potential civil rights violations. Our legal team estimates we could be looking at millions in damages if all the affected candidates file suit. What about criminal charges? Possible. What Vivienne's been doing could constitute criminal harassment, interference with employment opportunities, and potentially fraud if we can prove she was being compensated for her external consulting activities. Daniel sat back down and opened his desk drawer, pulling out what looked like an executive planning calendar. Elena, I want a comprehensive list of every candidate Vivienne influenced over the past 3 years. Start with the most qualified rejections and work backward. I want them contacted immediately about potential positions. He turned to me. Cassandra, I need to know if you're willing to be the lead plaintiff in what's going to be a very public legal case against your own sister. The question hung in the air between us. Taking legal action against Vivienne meant exposing our family dysfunction to public scrutiny. It meant acknowledging that the person who should have been my biggest supporter had instead been my most determined enemy. But I thought about all the other women whose dreams Vivienne had systematically destroyed. The ones who'd given up on their careers, moved away, or accepted that they simply weren't good enough for the professional world they'd dreamed of joining. Yes, I said firmly. I want to make sure she never has the power to do this to anyone else. Daniel nodded with grim satisfaction. Then we're going to take her down. All of it. The discrimination, the harassment, the illegal interference with employment opportunities. We're going to expose the entire network she's built and make sure every company she's influenced understands they've been participating in systematic discrimination. Elena was already taking notes. What about the restructuring plan for the marketing department? Accelerated timeline, Daniel said immediately. I want Vivienne's position eliminated and her responsibilities transferred to people who actually understand fair hiring practices. And I want Cassandra installed as Director of Marketing Operations with full authority over recruitment and hiring procedures. He looked at me directly. If you're willing to take it, you'll have the power to rebuild the entire hiring system from the ground up. Make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. The perfect symmetry of it was almost overwhelming. 6 weeks ago, I had been rejected for a coordinator position by someone who thought I wasn't qualified for basic marketing work. Now I was being offered the authority to oversee the entire department and ensure fair treatment for future candidates. When does this happen? I asked. Daniel's smile was sharp with anticipation. The restructuring announcement is scheduled for Monday morning. Vivienne will be informed that her position has been eliminated effective immediately, and she'll be escorted from the building pending the completion of the legal investigation. And then she'll discover that her replacement is the woman she spent 2 years trying to destroy, and that her new supervisor is the man she tried to sabotage by targeting his fiancé. Elena closed her laptop with a satisfied click. I think Vivienne is about to learn what it feels like to have her entire professional world systematically dismantled by people who actually know what they're doing. That evening, Daniel and I sat in our favorite corner booth at Clearwater Cafe, the same place where we'd celebrated small victories and talked through career challenges over the past 2 years. But tonight felt different. Tonight I wasn't the struggling job candidate seeking comfort after another rejection. Tonight, I was someone who just accepted a position that would give me the power to reshape an entire industry's hiring practices. I keep thinking about all the conversations we've had in this exact spot, I said, stirring my coffee absently. All the times you listened to me doubt myself, wonder what was wrong with me, question whether I was even cut out for corporate work. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. I feel sick thinking about how I tried to help. All those pep talks about persistence and believing in yourself, when what you really needed was someone to investigate the systematic sabotage happening right under our noses. You couldn't have known, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I was processing the fuller implications of everything we'd learned. Actually, that's not entirely true, is it? The signs were there. I pulled out my phone and opened my job application tracking spreadsheet, a detailed record I'd been keeping for the past year of every application, interview, and rejection. Look at this pattern. Every time I got excited about an opportunity, every time I thought I had a real chance, the rejection came within 48 hours. That's not normal hiring timeline behavior. Daniel studied the data with his analytical eye, and the feedback was always vague or contradictory to your actual qualifications. Right. Not quite the right fit. Looking for someone with more experience. Concerns about cultural alignment. I scrolled through months of rejection emails. But when Elena showed me the investigation files today, I realized something else. The companies that rejected me weren't just random targets. They were all organizations where Vivienne had established connections. I opened my laptop and pulled up a document I'd been working on since leaving Thornfield's offices. I spent the afternoon mapping every rejection against Vivienne's known network. 87% of my rejections came from companies where she had documented contacts. Daniel's expression hardened as he studied my analysis. She wasn't just sabotaging opportunities as they came up. She was strategically targeting your applications to companies where she could influence the outcome. It's worse than that, I continued, feeling a cold clarity that I'd never experienced before. Look at this timeline. The rejections escalated after family gatherings where I talked about my job search. She was using family dinners to gather intelligence about which positions mattered most to me, then making sure those were the ones that got destroyed. I showed him a particularly painful example. Remember the Morrison & Associates position I was so excited about in March? The one where I thought the interview went perfectly, but they rejected me for personality fit concerns? You were devastated for weeks. Because I'd told Vivienne at Mom's birthday party that it was my dream job, she knew exactly how much that rejection would hurt, so she made sure it happened. My voice was getting stronger, clearer as I connected the dots. She wasn't just sabotaging my career. She was conducting psychological warfare designed to break my confidence entirely. Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing the scope of what I was describing. Cassandra, what you're talking about isn't just workplace discrimination. This is systematic psychological abuse carried out over years. Exactly. And the most insidious part is how she convinced everyone, including me, that my failures were due to my own inadequacy. I pulled up another document on my laptop. I started tracking my self-doubt patterns, too. Every major rejection was followed by weeks of questioning my abilities, my qualifications, my right to even pursue certain types of positions. I showed him journal entries I'd written during my lowest moments, pages of self-criticism and defeated acceptance that I simply wasn't good enough for the professional world I wanted to join. She was systematically destroying my sense of self-worth, I continued. And she was doing it while positioning herself as the concerned sister who just wanted me to be realistic about my limitations. Daniel read through some of my journal entries, his jaw clenching with anger. Look at this progression. You start each job search period confident and optimistic. But after each round of Vivienne's sabotage, you aim lower and doubt yourself more. By the time I applied to Thornfield, I was already half convinced I wasn't qualified for the position, I admitted. Even though my portfolio was stronger than ever, Even though my skills exactly matched what they were looking for, I walked into that interview expecting to be found inadequate. Because she'd spent 2 years training you to expect failure. I closed my laptop and looked directly at Daniel. That ends now. Not just for me, but for every woman she's done this to. Elena mentioned that some of her targets gave up on their career goals entirely. Some moved away thinking they just couldn't compete in this market. How many dreams has she killed? How many women are working below their potential right now because Vivienne convinced them they weren't good enough? Daniel nodded grimly. The investigation Elena showed us covers 47 documented cases, but that's just at Thornfield. If she's been doing this across multiple companies for years, we could be talking about hundreds of women whose lives were derailed by one person's need to maintain psychological dominance, I finished. I pulled out a legal pad where I'd been taking notes throughout the day. I've been thinking about what Elena said regarding the civil rights case. If I'm going to be the lead plaintiff, I want to make sure we're not just seeking justice for me. I want to create a framework that protects future candidates from this kind of systematic abuse. What are you thinking? Industry-wide policy changes, mandatory transparency in hiring processes, legal penalties for companies that allow discriminatory gatekeeping, and most importantly, support systems for candidates who've been targeted by this kind of sabotage. I showed him the preliminary framework I'd sketched out. Some of these women gave up on careers they were perfectly suited for. They might not even realize they were victims of systematic discrimination rather than personal inadequacy. We need to reach them and offer them real opportunities to rebuild what was taken from them. Daniel studied my notes with the same focus he brought to major consulting projects. This is bigger than just exposing Vivienne. You're talking about reforming how hiring works across the entire industry. Exactly, because people like Vivienne don't operate in isolation. If she could build a network of influence across 14 companies, that means there are systemic vulnerabilities in how these organizations make hiring decisions. I felt a surge of purpose I'd never experienced before. We have an opportunity to not just get justice, but to prevent this from happening to anyone else. The legal case alone could take years, Daniel warned, and it's going to be incredibly public. Every detail of your family dysfunction, every aspect of Vivienne's manipulation, it's all going to be scrutinized in court and in the media. I thought about that for a moment, about our parents having to confront the reality of what their older daughter had been doing, about extended family members who'd been unknowingly feeding information to Vivienne, about the professional community that would learn how easily they'd been manipulated. Good, I said finally. Let it all come out. Let everyone see exactly how sophisticated and cruel this kind of abuse can be. Let them understand that what they thought was normal sibling rivalry was actually systematic oppression designed to destroy another person's life. I reached across the table and took both of Daniel's hands. For 2 years, I've been apologizing for my failures, making excuses for my rejections, and accepting that maybe I just wasn't cut out for the career I wanted. I've been living in the reality that Vivienne created for me. And now? Now I'm going to create a new reality. Not just for me, but for everyone she's targeted, and everyone who might be targeted in the future. I felt a certainty I'd never experienced before. I'm going to take the position Elena offered, and I'm going to use that platform to build hiring systems that are transparent, fair, and immune to the kind of manipulation Vivienne specialized in. Daniel's smile was fierce with pride and anticipation. So Monday morning, when Vivienne discovers she's being terminated and escorted from the building, you'll be the one overseeing the investigation into her misconduct? Monday morning, Vivienne learns that the sister she spent years trying to destroy is now her superior, with full authority to dismantle everything she built and rebuild it the right way. I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar app. And tomorrow I'm calling every woman Elena identified as one of Vivienne's targets. I'm going to tell them what really happened to their careers, and I'm going to offer them the opportunities they should have had all along. Starting with yourself? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months, starting with refusing to ever doubt my qualifications again. Starting with recognizing that every rejection I received was manufactured by someone who was threatened by my potential success. As we left the cafe that night, I felt like I was stepping into a completely different life. Not just a new job or a new opportunity, but a new understanding of who I was and what I was capable of achieving when I wasn't being systematically undermined by someone who was supposed to love me. The woman who'd served coffee that morning while questioning her worth was gone. In her place was someone who understood her actual value and was prepared to fight for it. Not just for herself, but for everyone who'd been told they weren't good enough by people who needed them to fail. Friday morning brought the most surreal phone call of my life. I was standing in my tiny studio apartment, packing up my coffee shop uniforms to donate to charity, when Elena called with news that would reshape everything I thought I knew about how the corporate world actually worked. "Cassandra, you need to get to Thornfield immediately," she said, her voice crackling with excitement. "Daniel's been in meetings since 6 a.m. with legal teams from 3 different law firms, and what we've discovered about Vivian's operation, it's bigger than we imagined. Much bigger." "Bigger how?" "I can't explain over the phone, but I will say this. You're not just going to be the lead plaintiff in a discrimination case. You're about to become the key witness in what might be the largest employment fraud investigation in the state's history." An hour later, I found myself in Thornfield's main conference room, surrounded by more legal firepower than I'd ever seen in one place. Daniel was at the head of the table, looking like the commanding executive I was still getting used to seeing him as. Elena sat beside 3 lawyers I didn't recognize, all of them with stacks of documents, and the intense focus that comes with handling a case that could make careers. "Cassandra," Daniel said as I took a seat, "meet Sarah Chen, federal employment law specialist, Marcus Thompson, white-collar crime prosecutor, and Jennifer Walsh, class action litigation expert. They've been reviewing the evidence Elena gathered, and they've uncovered something that changes everything." Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, opened a thick folder. "Ms. Rodriguez, what we initially thought was a case of individual discrimination has revealed itself to be part of a much larger criminal enterprise. Your sister hasn't just been sabotaging candidates for personal satisfaction, she's been monetizing her sabotage operation." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, monetizing?" Marcus Thompson, the prosecutor, pulled out financial records. "We subpoenaed Vivian's bank accounts and discovered that she's been receiving payments from multiple sources for her quote-quote consulting services. Companies have been paying her to eliminate specific candidates from consideration." He showed me bank statements with deposits that made my eyes widen. Regular payments of $2,000 to $5,000 from companies across the marketing sector, all labeled as recruitment consulting fees. "She's been running a black market hiring service," Jennifer Walsh explained. "Companies that wanted to avoid hiring certain types of candidates, women, minorities, people they viewed as troublemakers, would pay Vivian to ensure those candidates never made it through the hiring process." Elena leaned forward. "Remember how we found evidence of her network across 14 companies? It wasn't just informal influence, it was a paid service. She was essentially operating a discrimination for hire business." The scope of what they were describing was staggering. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on the financial records, at least 5 years, Sarah Chen replied. "But the sophistication suggests it's been developing for much longer." Vivian didn't just wake up one day and decide to become a professional discriminator. She built this operation methodically over time. Marcus showed me another set of documents. We also discovered that she's been selling information about candidates to competing companies. When someone applied to multiple organizations, she'd provide detailed intelligence reports about their background, vulnerabilities, and likelihood of accepting various offers. "Industrial espionage," Daniel said grimly. "She was trading in candidate information like it was a commodity." Jennifer Walsh opened her laptop and projected a network diagram onto the conference room screen. "This is what we've mapped so far of Vivian's operation. 23 companies paying for exclusion services, 47 documented instances of information trading, over 200 candidates affected by paid sabotage services. The diagram looked like something from a crime thriller, a complex web of connections showing money flows, information exchanges, and coordinated hiring manipulation across the entire Millhaven business community. But here's where it gets really interesting, Sarah Chen continued. Vivienne wasn't operating alone. We've identified at least 6 other HR professionals at different companies who were part of this network. They've been sharing information, coordinating rejections, and splitting fees for their services. Elena pulled up another document. The investigation started when Daniel noticed statistical anomalies in our hiring data, but now we're uncovering evidence of systematic employment fraud across multiple industries. Tech, finance, healthcare, marketing. This network has been influencing hiring decisions everywhere. I stared at the evidence spread across the table, trying to process the magnitude of what I was seeing. My sister has been running a criminal organization designed to control who gets hired in this city. And she's been using her position at Thornfield as her base of operations, Daniel added. Which means our company has been unknowingly facilitating a conspiracy that's affected hundreds of job seekers. Marcus Thompson leaned back in his chair. Ms. Rodriguez, what we're looking at here isn't just discrimination. It's racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit employment fraud, and potentially tax evasion if she hasn't been declaring all this consulting income. The federal penalties alone could result in decades of prison time, Sarah Chen added. But more importantly for our purposes, this gives us the legal framework to not just seek damages for affected candidates, but to dismantle the entire network and force systematic reforms across the industry. Jennifer Walsh turned to me directly. Cassandra, as the person who inadvertently exposed this operation, you're in a unique position. You're not just a victim. You're the key to bringing down an entire criminal enterprise that's been manipulating employment opportunities for years. Elena pulled out a document I hadn't seen before. There's something else. When the federal investigators seized Vivienne's computers, they found detailed records of every sabotage operation she's conducted, including audio recordings. Audio recordings? She's been recording her sabotage phone calls, Daniel explained, his voice tight with anger. Every conversation where she contacted companies to poison candidate reputations, every coordination call with her network partners, every negotiation for paid exclusion services. She documented everything. Marcus Thompson handed me a transcript. This is from a call she made to Morrison and Associates about your application in March. The one you thought was your dream job. I read the transcript with growing horror. It was a detailed conversation where Vivienne provided false information about my work history, invented concerns about my reliability, and suggested that hiring me would be a mistake that could damage the firm's reputation. All while positioning herself as a helpful industry insider providing valuable guidance. She recorded herself destroying my career, I whispered. She recorded herself destroying dozens of careers, Sarah Chen corrected. And she kept meticulous records of the payments she received for each successful sabotage operation. Elena showed me another financial document. Your rejection from Morrison and Associates generated a $3,000 consulting fee for Vivienne. She was literally being paid to ruin your life. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my sister systematically destroyed my career opportunities, she'd been profiting from my suffering. Every rejection that had sent me into weeks of self-doubt and depression had been a financial transaction for her. What happens now? I asked. Daniel's expression was grimly satisfied. Now we use every resource at our disposal to bring down the entire network. Federal investigators, state employment regulators, industry oversight boards. Everyone with jurisdiction over employment practices is going to be involved in dismantling this operation. And Vivienne? Marcus Thompson's smile was sharp. Monday morning, when she arrives at work, she'll be met by federal agents with an arrest warrant. The building escort Elena mentioned is going to be in handcuffs. Sarah Chen leaned forward. But Cassandra, we need you to understand what you're signing up for. This case is going to be massive. Media attention, congressional hearings, industry reform legislation. You're going to be at the center of a national conversation about employment discrimination and corporate corruption. I thought about all the women whose dreams had been systematically destroyed by this network. The ones who'd given up on their careers, moved away, or accepted that they simply weren't good enough for the professional world they'd wanted to join. The ones who'd never know that their failures weren't due to their own inadequacy, but to a criminal conspiracy designed to keep them from succeeding. How many companies are we talking about dismantling? I asked. Jennifer Walsh consulted her notes. 23 confirmed participants in the paid exclusion network, plus an estimated 40 to 50 additional organizations that received Vivienne's, quote, informal guidance without knowing they were participating in a criminal enterprise. And how many candidates were affected? Conservative estimate? Over 500 people over the past 5 years. But once we start publicizing the case and encouraging victims to come forward, that number could easily reach into the thousands. I looked around the table at these legal professionals, who'd assembled an army of resources to fight an injustice I'd discovered by accident. 6 weeks ago, I'd been serving coffee and wondering what was wrong with me that I couldn't get hired for jobs I was qualified for. Now I was sitting in a corporate conference room, surrounded by federal prosecutors and employment law specialists, learning that I'd inadvertently exposed one of the largest employment fraud operations in state history. When do we start? I asked. Daniel's smile was fierce with anticipation. We already have. By Monday evening, Vivienne and her network partners will be in federal custody, their operations will be completely dismantled, and you'll be sitting in the director's office of the company where she thought she could destroy your career forever. Elena pulled out one final document. And this is the executive order Daniel signed this morning, authorizing a complete review of every hiring decision influenced by discriminatory practices, with full reinstatement and compensation offered to every qualified candidate who was illegally rejected. I looked at the document that would potentially restore hundreds of careers that had been derailed by systematic criminal discrimination. My name was listed as the Director of Employment Justice Initiatives, a position that apparently hadn't existed until Daniel created it specifically to oversee the restoration process. So I'm not just getting the job I originally applied for, I said slowly. You're getting the power to rebuild the entire system from the ground up, Daniel confirmed. And to make sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else ever again. Saturday evening, I sat in Daniel's apartment, overlooking the city lights of Millhaven, reading through a document that would change how I understood every relationship in my life. The federal investigators had provided me with a psychological profile of Vivienne's operation, written by Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a forensic psychologist who specialized in workplace manipulation and family abuse dynamics. Cassandra, Daniel said gently, settling beside me on the couch, you don't have to read that tonight. You've had enough revelations for 1 week. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to understand all of it, not just what she did, but why she did it. And I need to understand why I let it happen for so long. The psychological profile was 43 pages of clinical analysis that read like a roadmap through every moment of self-doubt I'd experienced over the past few years. Dr. Martinez had studied the audio recordings, reviewed Vivienne's documentation methods, and analyzed the systematic nature of her psychological manipulation. The subject demonstrates classic patterns of malignant narcissism with sociopathic tendencies, I read aloud. Her need to maintain psychological dominance over family members manifests as sophisticated manipulation campaigns designed to prevent their independent success while maintaining the appearance of supportive family relationships. Daniel was quiet, letting me process the clinical language that gave names to experiences I'd never been able to articulate. Listen to this part, I continued. The subject's targeting of her sister represents a particularly insidious form of abuse because it exploits the victim's natural trust in family relationships. The victim was conditioned from childhood to seek approval from the subject, making her particularly vulnerable to systematic undermining disguised as concern or guidance. I looked up at Daniel. She's been training me to doubt myself since we were kids. All those times she would helpfully point out my mistakes, suggest I was being unrealistic about my goals, warn me that I might be setting myself up for disappointment. That was all designed to make me dependent on her validation. The report detailed specific psychological techniques Vivienne had used: gaslighting to make me question my own perceptions, future faking to give false hope before orchestrating disappointments, and triangulation to turn family members against each other while positioning herself as the stable, reliable one. "Here's the part about our parents," I said, finding a section that made my stomach clench. "The subject has been systematically manipulating family narratives to maintain her position as the successful child, while casting her sister as someone who needs protection from her own poor judgment. This dynamic serves two purposes. It ensures continued family support for the subject's behavior and creates additional psychological pressure on the victim to accept limited expectations." I thought about all the family conversations where Vivienne had worried about my career struggles, suggested I might be happier in less demanding positions, and convinced our parents that my rejections were evidence of my need for more realistic goals. She wasn't just sabotaging my job applications, I realized. She was rewriting the family story to make my failures seem inevitable and natural. Daniel reached for my hand. "What does the report say about recovery?" I flipped to a section titled "Healing and Empowerment for Victims of Systematic Family Abuse." Dr. Martinez had written extensive recommendations for people who'd been targets of long-term manipulation by family members. The most important step for victims is recognizing that their struggles were not caused by personal inadequacy but by deliberate sabotage designed to prevent their success, I read. Victims must give themselves explicit permission to pursue goals without seeking approval from their abuser and to trust their own judgment without external validation. The words hit me like a revelation. For years, I'd been unconsciously seeking Vivienne's approval for my career choices, telling her about job applications and interviews because some part of me still believed I needed her blessing to succeed. "Permission," I said softly. "I've been waiting for permission to be successful, permission to apply for positions that matched my qualifications, permission to believe I deserved opportunities, permission to be angry when I was treated unfairly." Daniel squeezed my hand. "And now?" I turned to another section of the report. Victims who successfully break free from systematic family manipulation often become powerful advocates for others in similar situations. Their lived experience with sophisticated psychological abuse gives them unique insight into helping other victims recognize and escape similar patterns. The report mentions something else important, I continued, finding a highlighted passage. Victims of this type of family abuse often struggle with imposter syndrome even after achieving success, because they've been conditioned to believe their achievements are fraudulent or temporary. Recovery requires actively practicing self-advocacy and celebrating accomplishments without minimizing them. I closed the report and looked around Daniel's apartment, at the space where I'd spent countless evenings doubting myself, questioning my qualifications, and accepting that maybe I just wasn't cut out for the career I wanted. The woman who'd sat in this same spot 6 weeks ago, crying over yet another rejection, felt like a different person entirely. "I want to call some of the other women who were targeted," I said suddenly. "Before Monday, before everything becomes public and chaotic. I want to reach out personally to the ones Elena identified and tell them what really happened to their careers." Daniel nodded. "Elena gave you their contact information?" "Everything. Names, contact details, records of how they were sabotaged, evidence of the payments Vivienne received for destroying their opportunities." I pulled out my phone and opened the file Elena had sent me. This woman, Patricia Williams, She was rejected from 6 different companies last year after Vivienne's network shared false information about her work history. She eventually took a position that was 2 levels below her qualifications because she thought that was the best she could do. I scrolled through more profiles. This one, Maria Santos. She was blacklisted from the entire healthcare marketing sector after Vivienne told multiple companies she had quote 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 quote. She ended up leaving Millhaven entirely because she couldn't find work in her field. How many are you planning to contact? All of them. Every single woman who was targeted by this network. I felt a sense of purpose that was completely new to me. They deserve to know that their failures weren't their fault. They deserve to understand that they were victims of a criminal conspiracy, not people who just couldn't measure up to professional standards. I started composing a text message, then stopped and switched to making an actual phone call. Patricia Williams answered on the 3rd ring. Hi, Patricia. This is Cassandra Rodriguez. I know this is going to sound strange, but I'm calling about the job rejections you experienced last year. I have information about why those companies turned you down, and it's not what you think. The conversation that followed was one of the most emotionally intense 30 minutes of my life. Patricia cried when I explained about Vivienne's network. She laughed with bitter recognition when I described the systematic manipulation. And she felt a rage that mirrored my own when she learned that her career had been deliberately derailed by people who profited from her failure. I blamed myself, she said through tears. I thought I wasn't interviewing well, wasn't presenting myself professionally enough. I took public speaking classes, hired a career coach, even considered going back to school for additional certifications, all because I believed there was something wrong with me. There was nothing wrong with you, I said firmly. Your qualifications were exactly what those companies needed. You were rejected because criminals were being paid to keep you from getting hired. By the time I hung up, Patricia had accepted a position as senior marketing manager at Thornfield, starting Monday morning, the same day Vivienne would be arrested. I made 6 more calls that evening. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Initial confusion, growing anger as I explained the conspiracy, and finally a sense of relief and validation that their struggles hadn't been due to personal inadequacy. This is what recovery looks like, I told Daniel as I finished the last call. Not just getting a job or achieving success, but understanding that I never needed anyone's permission to pursue my goals. I never needed to prove I was worthy of opportunities that matched my qualifications. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Thornfield building where I would start my new position in 36 hours. For years, I've been apologizing for wanting things, apologizing for applying to positions that seemed too good for me, apologizing for being disappointed when I was rejected. And now? Now I understand that wanting success isn't arrogant. It's normal. Pursuing opportunities that match your qualifications isn't overreaching. It's appropriate. And being angry when you're treated unfairly isn't being difficult. It's being human. I turned back to Daniel, feeling a clarity about my own worth that I'd never experienced before. Monday morning, when I walk into that director's office, I'm not going to feel like I'm getting away with something or that I don't belong there. I'm going to feel like I'm finally getting what I always deserved. Daniel's smile was filled with pride and love. And Vivienne? Vivienne is going to learn that the person she spent years trying to destroy is stronger than she ever imagined. She's going to discover that her victim has become the person with the power to ensure she never hurts anyone else again. I picked up Dr. Martinez's psychological profile one more time, but this time I focused on the final section, recommendations for moving forward. Victims of systematic family abuse must give themselves permission to succeed without guilt, to pursue their goals without seeking approval from their abuser, and to trust their own judgment without external validation, I read aloud. Most importantly, they must understand that their abuser's behavior was never about them, it was about the abuser's psychological need to maintain control. I closed the report and looked at Daniel. I give myself permission to be successful. I give myself permission to be proud of my accomplishments. And I give myself permission to make sure that no one else ever has to experience what I went through. What happens to the relationship with your parents? Your extended family? I thought about that for a moment, feeling surprisingly calm about what had once seemed like an impossible situation. I'm going to tell them the truth about what Vivienne's been doing. Some of them will believe me, and some won't. But my success is no longer dependent on their approval or understanding. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely free from the need to justify my ambitions to anyone. The woman who'd spent years seeking permission to pursue her dreams was gone, replaced by someone who understood that she'd always had the right to claim the success she'd worked for. 6 months later, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office on the 21st floor of Thornfield Industries, watching the morning bustle of downtown Millhaven spread out below me. The brass nameplate on my door read Cassandra Rodriguez, Director of Employment Justice Initiatives, and every time I saw it, I felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with purpose fulfilled. My office walls were covered with thank you letters from women whose careers we'd restored through the Justice Initiative program. Patricia Williams had been promoted to Senior Vice President of Marketing at a competing firm. Maria Santos had returned to Millhaven and was now running her own healthcare marketing consultancy. 47 women who'd been systematically excluded from opportunities had not only been offered positions matching their qualifications, but had become part of a network supporting other victims of employment discrimination. The program had grown far beyond what any of us had imagined. What started as restoring careers damaged by Vivienne's network had evolved into a comprehensive system for identifying and preventing discriminatory hiring practices across multiple industries. We now had partnerships with 18 companies, mandatory bias training for all HR personnel, and a confidential reporting system that had uncovered 3 additional discrimination networks in the past 4 months. Daniel knocked on my open door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the smile that had become my favorite way to start each workday. 6 months ago, we'd been a couple dealing with career struggles and family sabotage. Now we were partners in both life and professional mission, working together to reshape how employment opportunities were distributed in our community. The board meeting went well? He asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. Better than well, I said, pulling up the presentation I'd just finished delivering. They approved the expansion to 3 additional cities. By the end of next year, we'll have employment justice initiatives operating in Portland, Denver, and Atlanta. And the legislation? I grinned, feeling the same thrill I'd experienced every time we achieved another milestone in reforming the system. Congressman Bradley confirmed that the Employment Transparency Act will be introduced next month. Mandatory disclosure of all rejection reasons, standardized interview processes, and criminal penalties for systematic discrimination. Everything we recommended is going to become federal law. Daniel leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in amazement. Sometimes I still can't believe how far this has come. 6 months ago, you were serving coffee and doubting whether you belonged in corporate marketing. Now you're literally rewriting federal employment law. I thought about that transformation, not just the external changes, but the internal revolution that had occurred when I stopped seeking permission to claim my own worth. The woman who was rejected from that coordinator position doesn't exist anymore. She died the moment I understood that my failures were manufactured by someone else's insecurity. The criminal trials had concluded 3 months ago. Vivienne and 6 members of her network had received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years for racketeering, employment fraud, and conspiracy charges. The financial restitution alone had exceeded $12 million, but more importantly, The publicity surrounding the case had sparked a national conversation about hidden bias in hiring practices. "Any word from your family?" Daniel asked gently. It was a question he asked periodically, knowing that the public exposure of Vivienne's crimes had fractured family relationships in complex ways. Our parents had struggled to accept the extent of what their older daughter had been doing, with our mother initially defending Vivienne as someone who'd made mistakes, rather than acknowledging the systematic criminal behavior. "Mom called yesterday," I said. "She's finally ready to admit that what Vivienne did was deliberate abuse, not misguided concern. She wants to have dinner this weekend to apologize for all the time she pressured me to lower my expectations because Vivienne convinced her I was being unrealistic." "And your father?" "He's been following the Employment Justice Initiative in the news. Apparently, he's been telling people at his retirement community that his daughter is, quote, changing how the whole country handles job discrimination." I laughed, remembering the voicemail he'd left. He said he's proud of me for, quote, turning something terrible into something that helps everybody. The extended family had split along predictable lines. Some relatives had rallied around Vivienne, unable to process that someone they'd known for decades was capable of such systematic cruelty. Others had reached out to share their own stories of times when Vivienne had subtly undermined their achievements or made comments designed to lower their confidence. "The most important thing," I continued, "is that my relationship with my family is no longer contingent on their understanding or approval. I love them and I hope they can accept who I've become, but my success doesn't depend on their validation anymore." Elena knocked on my door, carrying a tablet and wearing the expression that meant she had exciting news to share. In the months since the investigation, she'd become my closest colleague and one of my dearest friends, someone who understood both the professional challenges of reforming discriminatory systems and the personal journey of recovering from systematic undermining. "The Washington Post article is going live in an hour," she announced, pulling up the preview on her tablet. The headline is "From Coffee Shop to Congressional Testimony: How One Woman's Job Rejection Exposed a Criminal Network and Changed Federal Law." I read through the article, which detailed not just the criminal case, but the broader impact of the Employment Justice Initiative. The reporter had interviewed dozens of women whose careers had been restored, companies that had implemented our bias prevention protocols, and federal legislators who credited our work with inspiring comprehensive employment reform. "There's something else," Elena continued, her grin widening. "The MacArthur Foundation called. You've been selected for a fellowship to expand the employment justice model internationally. They want to fund your work in exposing and preventing systematic hiring discrimination on a global scale." The MacArthur Fellowship, the so-called Genius Grant that provided 5 years of funding for innovative work that could change the world. 6 months ago, I'd been convinced I wasn't qualified for entry-level marketing positions. Now I was being recognized for work that was reshaping how employment opportunity was distributed across multiple countries. "When do they want an answer?" I asked. "You have until Friday, but honestly, Cassandra, this is the chance to take everything we've built here and scale it globally. Think about how many people are being systematically excluded from opportunities by networks like Vivienne's. This fellowship could give you the resources to identify and dismantle discrimination systems worldwide." I looked around my office at the evidence of what we'd accomplished in 6 months. The thank you letters, the policy documents, the partnership agreements, the legislative drafts that would become federal law. All of it had started with my decision to stop accepting that my failures were due to my own inadequacy. "There's a team meeting at 2 p.m., I told Elena. "Can you add the MacArthur opportunity to the agenda? I want everyone's input on how we could structure international expansion." After Elena left, Daniel and I sat in comfortable silence, both of us processing the magnitude of what had developed from one moment of truth-telling in a downtown park. The criminal network that had seemed so powerful and untouchable 6 months ago had been completely dismantled. The women who'd been systematically excluded from opportunities were not only working in positions that matched their qualifications, but were leading efforts to prevent others from experiencing similar discrimination. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't met Elena that morning?" Daniel asked. I considered the question seriously. "I think eventually someone would have exposed Vivian's network. Too many qualified people were being rejected for the pattern to stay hidden forever. But I'm glad it was me who got to be part of bringing it down." "Why?" "Because I understand what it feels like to have your self-worth systematically destroyed by someone who's supposed to love you. I know what it's like to doubt your own qualifications, because trusted people have convinced you that your failures are due to personal inadequacy." I stood up and walked back to the windows, looking out at the city where dozens of women were now working in careers they'd once thought were beyond their reach. "The women we've helped through the Justice Initiative don't just get their careers back," I continued. "They get their confidence back. They get permission to pursue their dreams without apologizing for their ambitions. They get to understand that they were never the problem." My phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia Williams. "Saw the Washington Post article preview. So proud to be part of this movement. Coffee next week to discuss the Atlanta expansion?" I showed the message to Daniel, feeling the same sense of purpose that had driven me through 6 months of congressional testimony, media interviews, and policy development. This is what justice looks like. Not just punishment for the people who caused harm, but systemic change that prevents the harm from happening to others. "And what does success look like?" Daniel asked. I thought about that question, remembering the woman who'd sat in this same building 6 months ago, devastated by rejection and convinced she wasn't good enough for the professional world she wanted to join. That woman had been seeking external validation, permission from others to believe in her own worth. Success looks like never again needing someone else's approval to pursue opportunities that match my qualifications, I said. Success looks like helping other women understand that their dreams are valid, their goals are achievable, and their worth isn't determined by people who benefit from their failure. I picked up my phone and typed a response to Patricia. "Coffee sounds perfect. And bring your ideas for international expansion. We're going global." As I sent the message, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't just stopping Vivienne from destroying more careers, or even getting the job I'd originally applied for. The greatest victory was understanding that I'd always been qualified for everything I'd pursued, and that no one else's insecurity or manipulation could change that fundamental truth. The woman who doubted herself was gone. In her place was someone who knew her worth, claimed her space, and used her power to ensure that others could do the same. Now I'm curious about your own experiences. Have you ever been in a situation where someone systematically undermined your confidence or career opportunities? Have you had to overcome family members or colleagues who tried to convince you that your goals were unrealistic? Comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories of transformation and empowerment reach around the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.